You wake up from bed, dreading the day ahead. You sit there. Feels like invisible straps are holding you in. Everything you need to do is piled on top of you. You know you need to drink water. You know you need to move. You know you need to exercise to get that work done you've been putting off or to do those chores and maintain the house. But for some reason, you just can't do it. Why? Why can't you do it? That is a big question. It is hard to figure out the why. And that's what this episode is for. This is episode 3 of the Gaudette experiment, where we are going to answer this question. In this podcast, we talk about life, wellness, and hobbies. So let's get into the main topic at hand. Why can't you do what you know you need to do? Now, before we get started, just a little disclaimer. This is by no means a substitute for actual mental health care. If you are in serious need of mental health care, it is a good idea to go seek a therapist and have your own personal health taken care of. And it is up to you whether you follow anything I say or what you take out of it. This is just something that might help you in the pursuit of better mental health care and better wellness overall. Now, to get to the topic at hand, the big issue is knowing things and doing things. That's two separate functions in the brain. They don't connect to the same system. They're both two separate systems in the brain in a way. So it's actually pretty common, and you're not alone in not being able to do what you know you need to do. It's very hard to transition between the knowing and the doing. But the key to this is understanding how motivation works, how discipline and willpower work, and ultimately how systems work. All three of those ideas together are the things that will make up the ability to do things, the ability to do what you know and to push forward. Let's zoom right in on motivation. Now, motivation, it primarily works by the brain's release of dopamine, which is the brain's chemical for rewarding things, the things we do that we enjoy, the when we get a reward, or when we avoid something that could be painful to us. Now, theoretically, with no motivation, we wouldn't be able to do anything. But it's not possible, but with zero motivation, it's impossible to actually do anything, even for survival. We always have some motivation, even if it's very small. There's always some there. But it's like you can't always access it, and it's not always strong enough to get you to do something, especially when there's conflicting things taking your motivation. Now, there's internal motivation, which is primarily driven by like a sense of purpose, act of service, anything that rewards you internally and doesn't come from an outside source. Or there's external motivation, like receiving a reward or getting praise from someone, or the result, like you just finished the project. That's external. External motivation lasts a short period of time and is generally external motivation is gone the moment you get the reward, the moment you complete the task. But internal motivation often lasts longer and can keep you going longer than external motivation. So it's important to foster an internal motivation as much as you can with anything you do by developing a sense of purpose with it or having a reason that is for yourself rather than for others. Now, genetically, we are primarily motivated for things that required for survival, like food, sleep, movement, fun, social, socializing with others, having friends, freedom to do things, power over others. Those are the five basic needs that we most often are motivated for, and everyone has a unique level for which they value each of those, for which they're motivated towards each of those. And the thing is, we're always most motivated for the things that give us the most pleasure with the least amount of pain. And with that, it can be difficult because there can be conflicting motivators, such as you want to work out, but your friend just invited you over. Now, if you like this friend, which you probably do if they're your friend, you might be more geared towards saying yes to the friend and avoiding your workout for the day because the workout, even though it brings pleasure afterwards, it gives you pain in the immediate term. where you go with friends, you get to have fun, which is motivating, without pain usually, unless you get in like a fight or something. And essentially, the most powerful way to use that is if you give it anything enough pain and enough pleasure to do, you'll be more motivated for it. So if you can think of the best case of scenario of what happens if you do what you're trying to do, and the worst case scenario of when you of what happens if you don't make the change you want to change, that can create the strongest form of motivation between having an avoidance of the worst case scenario and trying to reach the best case scenario. But motivation isn't the whole story. You see, there's a reason people can overcome their motivation. People can do things despite being unmotivated or having very little motivation to do so. Now, why is that? Well, the key to that answer relies on willpower and discipline, and that's where we're going to talk about next. Willpower and discipline are tools that can help you overcome your motivation. You can do things against what you're most motivated for, such as grabbing the bag of chips that's been hiding in your counter, or you can even overcome the ability to not want to do something, like you don't want to mow the lawn today, but you can overcome that feeling with willpower and discipline to get yourself to mow the lawn and move forward with that. Now, the important thing to understand with willpower and discipline is they're both basically the same concept in a way, and they both work like a muscle. The more you use it, the more it gets fatigued in a day. If you don't rest, it fatigues like a muscle, and you can't use it anymore. Until you rest, of course. It recharges like a battery, like a muscle. It drains. You need energy to use willpower, to exert discipline. You need at least some energy to do so. If you ever had that experience where you've been resisting eating a ton of chips or something, like from your cabinet, all day you've been avoiding it, but you've been having that craving, you really want them, and eventually you just cave and eat the whole bag more than you intend, that's an example. That's how it feels when you have finally lost your willpower. You have fatigued your willpower and it needed to rest, and because you were avoiding those chips, whether or not you knew it or whether or not you felt it, because you had that craving. Even if you weren't actively thinking about it, you were exerting willpower in order to not grab those chips. And eventually you ran out of willpower because you were constantly straining it throughout the day. And it's even shown, without rest, both willpower and decision making decrease in quality over time. You have less willpower, you can make less good decisions. The longer and more decisions you make, and the more willpower you exert before you recharge. And it's shown that after a break, they generally can return back to normal. So the thing is, you need to remember, if you're going to use willpower and discipline to do anything, you need to rest. You need rest. Take breaks every so often. Just let yourself rest and recharge. And also with willpower, you have less the more you haven't taken care of yourself. You haven't gotten sleep, already you have lower willpower for the day. Didn't exercise for the day, probably lower willpower. Not eating enough, again, lower willpower. And anything that you do that doesn't take care of yourself or hurt yourself essentially lowers the willpower. So essentially, you need to take care of yourself to increase your willpower. If you exercise on it, even just exercising, it can increase the amount of willpower you have for a day. Taking care of yourself increases the amount of willpower you have for a day. Genetically, we all have different amounts at the start, and then different amounts based on how we were raised. And then you can train your willpower like a muscle. It's pretty much like a muscle. You can train it, you can grow willpower. But growing willpower takes fighting against your natural instincts, and that takes work, and that is very difficult. It's a slow changing process to build more willpower. And it's really hard to go on willpower alone. You will eventually crack if you're going just on willpower. So, because it's limited because of its energy, there is one thing that is more powerful than both willpower and motivation combined, and that are the systems and habits you put in place. And that's what we're about to talk about next. It's likely because you're burnt out, you've been having too much on your plate, and you don't know where to start, you haven't been moving forward, it's been very difficult, and you're just burnt out. You have too much. You need to take it one at a time and take one piece off of the puzzle at a time. And the thing is, it's very important to take small steps to move forward. And it's not always easy and sometimes not possible to reduce the amount you do in a day, but as much as possible, you want to reduce and do as little as you can in order to do better for yourself. And that's where we get into the talk about routines and systems, habits. The brain craves these because what happens when you create a routine is your brain makes it easier to do it. And then eventually it requires little to no energy to keep doing that because it's automatic. All habits become automatic eventually to a point where it doesn't even take energy to do so anymore. So it's like it saves the time for the brain, it saves energy for the brain, and you can do more because your brain's taking care of the automatic things that you're made a routine. Now, it does take a while to build a routine, but it's the more reps, the more wiring, the stronger it gets, the easier the action becomes, and so on. And the brain adapts to your habits. So you throw a football every day, you're going to get better at throwing a football. Your arm's going to do the motion a lot better. The thing is, if you exercise at the same time every day, your brain will literally adapt to send energy like 30 minutes before you have to exercise just because it knows you're about to exercise. Or if you take a nap every day after work, your brain will learn that it's nap time after work, and then it will make you sleepy so that you are more ready to take a nap. The brain adapts. It fits your habits. You become your habits. Your habits are the things that make you and the things that your brain adapts to create you. Now, the thing is, a lot of habits we don't control. Like, well, at least when they were given to us, essentially. You learn your habits from the peers you try to fit in with when you're going through school, and you also learn your habits from your parents and your immediate family. Anyone you look up to, you learn these habits from. You copy the habits. You gain the food habits usually from your immediate family. What did they eat? How much did they eat? That's usually where those habits come from. How much did they move? Now, habits aren't permanent. You can break habits. But the longer and the more repetitions you've been following those habits for, the harder it is to break a habit. It ingrains itself in your brain. It takes a lot of work to undo lifestyle habits from years ago. You can't expect to break it in a day. It takes time. It's slow. Now, the thing is, when building a habit, it's very important to start small. You got to start small. Build slow and steady. You need to use motivation and willpower to start a habit. You can't have a habit without having first using motivation and willpower that we talked about earlier to start it. You need to start it until it turns into a habit. And it turns into a habit by having enough repetitions. So if you want to eat better, you have to have more and more repetitions of building a better relationship with food. And the thing with good habits is you can make them easier by rewarding them. The brain loves when you reward it. You can track streaks. Streaks make doing more habits easier. We don't like breaking streaks. It's funny that we as humans don't like breaking streaks. Maybe it's Snapchat, maybe it's other things, but we don't like to break streaks. We're like, oh, 365 days, let's go. But yeah, those help. Making it obvious, because if you forget to do a habit in the first place, you're going to miss a rep. And missing repetitions doesn't completely reset your progress, but it slows the progress down. So don't beat yourself up for missing any repetitions on habits, but you got to make it obvious so you forget less. So, leave your workout clothes open in an obvious place in the morning, like near your front door if you want to go to the gym in the morning. Do things to remind you, to make it easy to remember. And quite likewise with like a bad habit, you need to make bad habits as painful as possible to do. And by painful, I don't necessarily mean that it hurts. I just mean that you have to jump over hurdles, like hiding junk food or not keeping it in the house in the first place so that you have to go to the store if you even want the junk food. That takes even more willpower to get to the store than it does to just open a cabinet, because you're creating obstacles. You're making it so that it's not visible. You're making it so that you have to jump over more hurdles. That's not as satisfying to do because you had to jump over all these hurdles just to get one bag of chips. So it's like, these are the little things. You have to make it as painful as possible, as hard to do as possible in order to break habits. And it takes a long time. The other thing to do with bad habits is you want to find a substitute. So the thing is, with a lot of bad habits, they're usually there because they provide us some reward, like food, like chocolate or anything like that, like chips, chocolate. It tastes good. It tastes really good. So like a replacement habit would be finding a food that tastes similar or provides the same kind of satisfaction. That's but that's a little healthier or healthier in general. And with food habits, you don't have to completely stop eating bad food. It's just like you have to focus on good food for the most part. Everything is built step by step. You can't build a house without a foundation. You have to build a house one step at a time until eventually it's built. Like, you can't do anything you can't just plop a house down. You have to build it step by step. Put the foundation in, build the walls, build the floors. Obviously not in that order, but yeah, that's the thing. Everything step by step. You have to make sure that you are um, building habits that make you, the person you want to become, because you are your habits. So if you want to be a better person, create better habits. If you have a different ideal of person you want to be, build better habits. Everything comes down to building the habits that make you the better person, starting small and doing one step at a time. Using that motivation and discipline early on to help build the habits, and then letting the system take over to do the things that you want to do with very little energy. And the thing is, when you do this, it takes quite a few repetitions, and you can't expect results overnight, but it's much easier if you build one habit at a time. You will have a lot of habits you want to build, but starting one habit at a time until it starts to feel like it's getting boring and that's taken over and that it's taking care of itself, then add another habit. That's the easiest way to do it, is when you can do one thing at a time. And that's it for talk on motivation, discipline, and habits and systems. Thank you, everyone who's still here, for listening. I really enjoyed making this episode, and I hope you did too. And if you enjoyed the episode, please like and share the podcast, listen to it again, whatever you feel like doing with it. And I hope to see you in another episode. And I'm going to leave you off with a question for thought. What is the ideal you? Who is that? And also, what are you going to try to do to become that person? How are you going to get there? What steps are you going to take? What habits do you need to form? And what is the reason you want to become that person?